and you get $600,000 of profit from that one investment. You sell it off and now you're debt free. So now this property that was originally costing you $20,000 per year now costs you $11,000 per year because you get that $9K back. How to pay off your mortgage in less than 10 years with $0 out of pocket. That's what we're going to be covering in this video. Most people take 30 years to pay off their mortgage, pay hundreds and thousands of dollars in interest to the banks. In this video, we're going to talk about how you can make that life cycle a lot shorter and pay off your mortgage in less than 10 years using one or two simple strategies. Now, I should say, as always, this is not financial advice. Make sure to speak to your financial advisor and get specific advice to you. If you don't have one, feel free to reach out and we can connect you with one. Secondly, if you're a sophisticated investor, I don't think this video is for you. It's covering pretty basic concepts that are super important, but stuff that you probably already know. But if you're an early stage beginner investor, definitely watch this video. It's going to be nothing short of life-changing. All right, before we talk about the strategy itself, let's start at the beginning. So you're someone who owns their own home at this stage. If you don't already, probably watch our video on rent vesting. That's a better place to start. So you own your own home. You bought it at some point. Let's run an example. You bought $1 million home 5 years ago with a $200,000 20% deposit. So when you bought that home, you bought it with $800,000 of debt and a 20% deposit. Now what you're going to be doing is you're going to be thinking about how you can use the equity in that home to build your portfolio and to pay off your debt. That's the most important thing we want to be looking at. So 5 years have passed. The value of your property has moved up. So let's say in this example, the value of your property is now around $1.2 million and you've paid off $100,000 in debt. So now your loan is $700,000 and the equity in your property is $500,000. How do you pay off that $700,000, not in 25 years remaining, but in a much shorter time span? Now, let's talk about the most important next step. Now, this is something that's a huge leverage point that many Australians use to build their wealth and pay off their mortgage. The funny thing is thousands, if not millions of Australians don't even know that this is possible. And that is that if you have equity in your home, you can use that equity to buy a property without any cash out of your pocket. So how exactly does this work? Let's go back to the example that we laid out earlier. An individual who bought a property for $1 million and now that property is worth $1.2 million with $500K equity. If you go to the bank and you have borrowing capacity, the bank will allow you to take out a certain amount of that equity that you can use for the deposit on your next property. So in this scenario, the property is worth $1.2 million. The individual has $500K equity. Each bank will have a different formula, but generally the bank will allow you to take up to 80% loan to value ratio of the current value of that property. So if you were to put a very basic formula, we'd say 1.2 million times 0.8 minus the remaining loan. So running the numbers on that example, $1.2 million is the value of the property, $700K is the debt, and $500K is the equity. The formula the banks are going to use at a very basic level, each bank will have its own formula, right? But at a very basic level, you can use up to 80% LVR, LVR meaning loan to value ratio from that property. The formula we're going to use is 1.2 million times 0.8 minus the remaining debt of 700,000, which leaves us with $260,000 of usable equity. Now, what you can use that equity for is the deposit on your next property. This means that you don't need any cash out of your pocket to buy that next property. You're using the equity that is within your existing own home. Now, the great part about this is you can use that equity not just for the deposit, but for all of your buying costs. Things like stamp duty, conveyancer costs, other professional costs. Meaning that when you buy that property, you are $0 out of pocket. You're using money that is coming from the equity of the existing home that you have. So now a lot of you might be wondering, okay, Arshad, you haven't shown me how to pay off my debt. You've just shown me how to buy a property using equity, which is great. Now, how do we pay off our debt? It depends on how much debt we have and the growth of that property. So in this scenario, for example, we buy an $800,000 property using that $260K of equity. $160K goes into the deposit and another $40 to $50K for stamp duty and other costs. That property is worth $800,000. Over a 10-year time span, the value of that property increases. Let's go with an average performance property. Even though at Pathway Property, we outperform the average at a rate of 154% compared to the national average. But even if we take the national average and you buy a property that's growing 7% per annum, 7 to 8% per annum, that property should roughly double in price after 10 years. So this $800,000 property that we've bought as an investment at the 10-year mark is worth roughly $1.6 million. Once you sell that property at the 10-year mark, factor into consideration other costs, things like capital gains, selling agent costs, so on and so forth, you should be left with somewhere in between $500,000 to $650,000. Now, at the same time, the amount of debt on your own home would have most likely decreased. So after 10 years, let's say, for example, you have $600,000 left on your loan and you get $600,000 of profit from that one investment. You sell it off and now you're debt free. So that's the basic formula of how we're going to use our equity to pay off our debt in less than 10 years. Now let's talk about the second part of the equation, and that's cash flow. For many people watching this, they're saying, Arshad, you said $0 out of pocket. Yes, this property is costing me $0 out of pocket up front, but what about the ongoing costs of a property? This is where negative gearing and tax deductions make a huge difference. So let's go back to the example that we were running. And I know there's a lot of maths in this video, but hopefully it's all very useful maths. And what we can do is, if you're interested, you can run these numbers yourself. We have a spreadsheet available that runs through all the numbers in depth, and there's a video on how to use it. Check the description of the video and feel free to download that spreadsheet for free, the property cash flow calculator spreadsheet. Let's get back to our example now. So we've bought an $800,000 property. Let's say that property is yielding at 4.5%. So it's bringing in roughly $36,000 of rent a year. Now, our interest rate is roughly 6%. In this scenario, we've set the property at an interest-only loan. So it's costing us roughly $48,000 in bank repayments per year. On top of that, there are all of our holding costs, council and water rates, building insurance, so on and so forth. Let's say that that's $8,000 per year. So this property is bringing in $36,000 and is costing us $48,000 plus another $8,000. So this property is costing us $20,000 per year. Now, for those of you watching, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Arshad, you said that this property is going to be costing us $0 per year. That $20,000 it costs you is $20,000 before tax. When it comes to property investing, there's heaps of tax deductions that come with it. The two main tax deductions that we can look at is number one, holding cost tax deductions, and number two, we can look at our depreciation tax deductions. So let's carry on with the example, and let's say that you as an individual are in the top tax bracket, 45 cents on the dollar. That $20,000 will decrease your taxable income by $20,000. So you'll be getting back $9K in tax deductions. So now this property that was originally costing you $20,000 per year now costs you $11,000 per year because you get that $9K back. Now, the second thing that you can do is you get something called a depreciation schedule. The newer the property, the more depreciation you'll get. The older the property, the less depreciation you'll get. You'll use an individual called a quantity surveyor who will map out what the depreciation looks like. If you want this property to cost you $0 per year, you need to find a deal that will get you $11K back in depreciation tax deductions. Now, realistically, that is quite a large amount, which means that you'll be buying a very new property, or you'll be buying a property where you're overcapitalizing on the value of the building. So we do want to find that balance, but again, it's possible. We can go for a higher yield deal, or we can go for a deal where there's a lot more depreciation, bringing the tax deductions to cover the full $20K of costs. Now you're left with a property that costs you $20K before tax, and after tax, it costs you $0. The government is paying for your property. $0 out of pocket up front and $0 out of pocket throughout the lifetime of the loan. And that's the simplest way to pay off your home mortgage. $0 out of pocket up front and $0 out of pocket year on year. getting you to be mortgage free in less than 10 years. There is a few things that I do want to flag over here for you to think about. Number one is, should you only buy one property? A lot of individuals will be able to pay off their mortgage with one, maybe two properties. However, we do want to be thinking about other goals that we might have in building our portfolio. And that's not just paying off our mortgage, but on top of paying off our mortgage, building a strong capital base so that we can eventually have strong passive income. That means that we're going to buy a few properties that we can sell eventually to pay off our mortgage. And we're going to buy other properties that we can eventually sell to buy high cash flow assets such as commercial property or other similar asset classes, allowing us to achieve not just paying off our own home, but achieve a strong passive income that we can semi-retire off and reach what a lot of individuals call financial freedom, even though I personally don't love that phrase. It's a bit overused by social media influencers and those financial gurus. So that's the first caveat. The second caveat is, yes, it is possible to make a property neutral cash flow after tax deductions. However, we do want to be thinking about if we're sacrificing a lot of growth. If we over-focus on things like depreciation and yield, it can result in us getting an asset that's not going to grow as much or not going to perform as strongly. So we want to make sure that we find that right balance between cash flow and capital growth that will allow us to maintain our ongoing lifestyle needs year to year, but also allow us to achieve our long-term financial goals. Now, if this all sounded interesting to you, feel free to book a chat with us. To me, I'm a strong believer that at least buying one or two investments using the equity in your own home is a no-brainer. The main thing that most individuals need to do is just find that balance of cash flow so that they can maintain their ongoing lifestyle in addition to building their portfolio. Let me know if you have any other further questions. Feel free to drop a comment and do reach out to us. We have a free consultation available in the link below.